I've been with Keller Williams for 25 years. So I started with Keller Williams, I started in 1995, late 95. And one of the things that created this opportunity for me, and hopefully you'll look at it as an opportunity for you, is I've been very heavy into training basically my whole career. I taught for the CRS program, which is a designation for the National Association of Realtors. That designation stands for Certified Residential Specialist. And then when I joined Keller Williams in 95, roughly somewhere 6 months to a year later, we started Keller Williams University. So when I first joined Keller, Gary Keller, the co-founder, was the only one really teaching. And Gary wasn't real happy or didn't really want to travel that much. But in those days, we only had 1,800 associates in the whole company. So he didn't have to travel all that much, but he could see the future and he could see the growth that was starting to take place. And he said, I need help. So we formed Keller Williams University. There were about 11 of us that formed the university, and I was one of the original 11. And I've just been teaching for Keller Williams University ever since. And so I only teach 3 or 4 things. I don't teach everything. I only teach the things that I'm passionate about. And this is one of them. This is, I call this class, How Your Mets Can Make You Millions. Now, Keller Williams kind of recognizes this material as the MREA lead generation material. And so I don't disagree with that. But I don't teach it from the book exactly, but if you were reading in the book, you would recognize most of what I'm saying. And then there'd be some more stuff that they wrote in The Millionaire Real Estate Agent,
Share those
the
with
MREA
us
book.
so we can see what areas we need to help.
So what we're going to talk about is your database. And I would say this to you, in all my years, I created my first database in 1989. And it was almost by accident. A friend of mine called me up, he was in the real estate business too. He wasn't with Keller Williams. And at 1989, I wasn't either. But he said, hey, I just created some postcards and I want you to have a set of them because you need to send them out to everybody you know. And I said, well, okay. What do the postcards say? And he said, well, they say different things, but basically, they're always just reminding people that you're in the business and you're available to help them. I said, oh, okay. So when I send these postcards out, how often do I send them out? He said, well, you send them out once a month, 12 times a year. I said, okay. And I said, when I start sending these out, what's going to happen? I mean, I wasn't the brightest guy in the pen here. So he said, well, people will start calling you. Oh, okay. He said, yeah, they'll call you to do business with you or they'll call you to refer business to you. I said, oh, okay. All right. Well, that sounds okay. So I had a database. I put together a database of 300 people. I didn't even really know how to use the computer that well. So I had my wife go to a class at the community college in the evenings. And so she went like 3 evenings. And she taught me, she learned and then taught me how to put a database together and how to print labels. That was a real important part right then. So my first database mail out was I think it was in May of 1989. And I sent out 300 postcards. And I got about 4 or 5 responses, no business. Just 4 or 5, hey, good to hear from you. Thanks for putting me on your mailing list. Good to see you're back in sales, because I had been in management and ownership before. So, okay, I wasn't blown away, but it started working so well in the following months that I really got passionate about and got super focused on increasing the size of the database. And I eventually got the database up to over 1,800 people. And when I started when I was mailing out to those 1,800 people every month, each month I was getting anywhere from 6 to 20 calls, emails, responses of some kind, and the business was really, really going well. So I want to tell you about some of the things that I discovered along the way, but I want to give you a couple of quotes first. One quote that I almost always will use at the beginning of a class is a quote from Socrates. And here's what he said. He said, "I cannot teach anyone anything. I can only make them think." And here's what I know. Here's what I know from personal experience. I can talk to you about database till I'm blue in the face. I can talk to you about database and why you should have a database and how much good it's done for me and how many other people who've been successful have a great database. I can do that every day. And it may or may not make any difference to you. This has to be something you decide. This has to be something you implement. This has to be something you see the value in. So I'm not trying to teach you anything today. I'm just going to share with you. I'm going to share ideas. I'm going to share my personal experiences. I'm going to share the wins. I'm going to share some of the mistakes I made. And then you take all that and you decide what to do with it. So that's kind of my disclaimer, because I can't tell you how many times I've taught database well over 200 times. Sometimes I teach it to a class. Sometimes I teach it to an agent one-on-one. I will say this, when agents ask me, gosh, after 44 years, what's the best piece of advice you would give a new or young agent? I said, without a doubt, create a database, have a systematic way to stay in touch with it, and just keep on keeping on. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's start with this. This is my belief. This is my opinion. You decide whether you believe it or not. You decide whether you want to research it or not. But I believe that having a database, having a good database, is non-negotiable if you want a successful career in real estate. I believe if you want a successful career in real estate, you must have a database. Now, what did I say? I said career. I didn't say year. I said a career. That means year after year after year after year. Because if you don't have something like a database, you will really feel like you're starting over every year, because you will be. You'll be starting over every year. So it is non-negotiable that you have a great database. Now, here's what is negotiable. What is negotiable is how you build it. That's negotiable. You can build it by buying names. You can build it by knocking doors. You can build it by cold calling on the phone. You can build it by calling for sale by owners, calling expired, starting a geographic farm. There are many ways you can build it. And so how you build it is negotiable. But what's non-negotiable, again, is you got to have a database. And it's got to be reasonably sizable. As a matter of fact, I'm going to refer you to a book, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, which I mentioned to you earlier. And I would suggest to you that you hopefully have read, and if you haven't, read this book very soon, and then go in and reread about once every couple of weeks, reread just the part about database. And that's only like 25 pages out of the whole book. Read the part on database again and again and again and again. Now, I'm going to refer you to page 142, and I'm going to read from 142 because there's really two quotes on page 142 that I think back up my point about how important having a database is. But you won't hear a lot in the book or from me about how you build the database, because that's your choice. You choose how to build it. Here's the first quote that I'm going to read from page 142. Your database is your business. So let's analyze that. I think it's pretty straightforward, but let's just play with this. If you don't have a database, guess what that implies? You don't have a business. If you don't have a database, you don't have a business. If your database kind of is puny, is weak, is not that great, then that's the way your business will be. If you have a booming database, a strong database, a vibrant database, then that's how your business is going to be. Now, let me go on and read the next part of it. The size of your real estate sales business will be in direct proportion to the size and quality of your database. Now, the size of your database would be pretty obvious what that means. But I want to be real clear about what the quality of your database is. The quality of your database really speaks to the quality of the relationships you have with the names in your database. So let's take a look at this. Suppose I was starting off and I agreed with all of this, and I said, okay, I'm going to start off with a booming database. I'm going to buy 1,000 names. I'm going to buy 1,000 names off a mailing list. So now, boom, I've got 1,000 people in my database. Aren't I special? Well, the only problem with that is that second quote says that your business will be in direct proportion to not only the size of your database, but the quality of your database. That's a size and quality, not size or quality. So if the quality of your database was a function of how good your relationships are with the people in your database, and you just bought 1,000 names, I would say the quality of your database is 0. You don't have any relationship with any of those 1,000 people. Can I get a thumbs up on that? Everybody with me on this? Okay. So when you think about the world and well, I'll get to that in a second. All right, so size and quality, very important, very important. Now, let me digress and say this. So in the world, there's two groups of people in the world. Here's how I want you to think about it. By the way, one of my characteristics, one of my beliefs is try to make the complicated simple. Because if we can take the complicated and make it simple, we are more likely to do it. I personally shy away from doing things that I feel are complicated. I shy away from them. I postpone them. I sometimes create a problem with my own mindset where I say, well, this isn't something I understand. I'm not sure I can even do it. But if I can break something complicated down to very simple steps, then I'm more likely to do it. So that's kind of my style. So from a style standpoint, there's only two groups of people in the world. One group is called Mets. Those are the people that you've already met. They already know you, like you, trust you to some degree. Now, they don't all know you, like you, and trust you to the same degree, but they've at least heard of you. They've met you casually. They've met you very well. They're buddy-buddy with you. That's one group in the world. The only other group in the world is the group that hasn't met you. So you have the Mets and the haven't Mets. That's it. There's no third group that's thinking about meeting you. They either have met you or they know of you or they don't. Period. The end. So if I were building a database, one of my options, as I've said already, is to buy leads, buy names. Buy names. All right, we've already talked about zero relationship with those. Zero. Now, suppose I took another course and I said, well, why don't I just put names in my database to begin with of people I already know? Like my neighbors, maybe some past coworkers, maybe some people I've done business with already, maybe family, maybe personal friends. For me, I'm a golfer, so some of the people I've met playing golf. I'm a big believer in putting agents in my database. So I put agents in my database, people who I had met. So let's suppose I start off with 100 or 200 people from various locations and various places, but I know them all. So those would be Mets. Yes, Mets. Now I got 200 Mets, or I got 1,000 haven't Mets. Which group do you think I'm going to get business from first? And which group do you think is going to provide me with the most business? Well, my experience tells me it's going to be the Mets. It's going to be the smaller group, but the group that I have better relationships with. And by the way, that was my experience. If I hold a house open, I talk about this a lot with people because a lot of people hold houses open and they do it not only to sell that house, but to try to get names. And then hopefully, theoretically, they put those names in the database. Now, those people met you when they walked into the open house. Everybody agree on that? Now, before they walked into the open house, more than likely, I would classify them as a haven't met. But the moment they walk in the house, assuming they give you their correct name and address, they become a met, right? So that's quite literally better than 1,000 names off a mailing list who've never laid eyes on you. But it's not as good as the people who you know better. So I would call those people who walk in on an open house and you meet them and you get their information and you put them into your database. I would call those people a barely met. Now you won't see that in the Red Book. That's my own creation. That you've barely met them. Now, is it possible that you could do business with them immediately? The answer to that is yes. Yes. Is the probability high that you will do business with them immediately? That's correct. Agent, is it Hufford? You got it. Keep that head going, yes or no. You're right. No, the probability is not high, but there's a chance. And so if I was holding houses open and 5 couples walked in and I got their proper name and address, I would definitely put them in my database. But I would plan on those people. It would take a while for us to get to a point in a relationship where there was enough trust where they would call me and do business with me. Okay, so let's get back to the negotiables and the non-negotiables. So just to repeat, listen, I'm going to pound this home. I'm going to teach you less, but teach you hopefully deeper, or share with you deeper, not teach you, share with you deeper. The first non-negotiable was for you to have a successful career in the real estate business, you've got to have a database. The non-negotiables that go along with that is how you build it. Okay, let me give you the next non-negotiable and negotiables. The second non-negotiable is for you to have a successful business in real estate, for you to have a successful career in real estate, you must stay in touch with the people in your database on a systematic basis. That's non-negotiable. You must stay in touch with them. I got some news for you. The expression out of sight, out of mind will come into play here. They'll forget you. I had a client one time who bought a house from me, and he was referred to me by somebody. He was moving from San Antonio to Dallas, where I live. And then he moved to Austin, and I sold his house for him when he moved to Austin. He wanted to be near his grandkids. He was in the banking business. And one day, about a year after he moved to Austin, or maybe even a couple of years after he moved to Austin, he called me and he said, "Hey, I'm getting in the real estate business." I said, "Fantastic." I said, "Are you going to join us here at Keller Williams?" He said, "Well, I hadn't planned on that." I said, "Well, you got to at least plan on talking to us." And so he agreed. He came to Keller Williams, and in the deal, I said that I would coach him a little bit, or I'd mentor him to some degree. So we met for lunch in Austin one day, and he's pretty new. I bet he hadn't been in the business 3 months yet. So he was very new, actually. So he said, "So I want to show you my business plan." And so he proceeded to tell me how he was going to reach out to bank trust departments and commercial bankers and attorneys who handle divorces and estates and estate planners and all this. And I mean, I didn't even follow half of the people. I didn't even understand half the people he was going to reach out to, but no, okay. But here's what I said to him at the end. I said, "You know what? His name is Tom." And I said, "Tom, there's one group that I don't see on here as far as, your strategy, your business plan." And he said, "What group is that?" I said, "Well, the group that the people you already know." "Yeah, I don't see anything about the people you already know." And he said, "Well, they're not there. They're not in my business plan." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, because they already know me. And if they already know me, then they'll do business with me." I said, "Tom, what if they already know you, but they forget you?" What if they already know you, but they don't think of you at the right time? And Tom, what if they know you as a banker? Or what if they know you as an ex-neighbor? What makes you think they know you as a realtor since you've only been a realtor for 3 months? And so that's the point. The touches, the contacts are to remind people that you're in the business and you're certainly ready, willing, and able to help them or anyone they know with real estate needs in Dallas or New Jersey or wherever you are. Wherever you are. And that's non-negotiable that you stay in touch with them. Now, here's what's negotiable. How often you stay in touch with them. How often you stay in touch with them, and how you stay in touch with them. You can stay in touch with them by phone. You can stay in touch with them by snail mail. You can stay in touch with them by dropping by and seeing them, taking them out to lunch. But this taking them out to lunch, one thing I want to emphasize, when we start talking about staying in touch with people, we're talking about staying in touch with all the people in your database, not just a chosen few. Because I talk to some people and I say to them, well, how often do you stay in touch with the people in your database? And I get this quote pretty frequently. Oh, I stay in touch with them all the time. Well, you don't stay in touch with all of them all the time. You actually probably stay in touch with some of them all the time. So this has to be a systematic approach, And one of the keys to why you have to be systematic about it, why it's so important, it's what I call my 200 by 200 rule. And here's what the 200 by 200 rule means, and here's what it tells us. Researchers, statistics tell us the average person is acquainted with 200 people. The average person in our world, in our society, the average person is acquainted with 200 people. Well, let's just for the moment consider all of us average, which of course, based on what I've been told about your market center, that's underscoring things. You guys are much better than average, but let's just use average for a second. That means everybody on the call here knows 200 people. Again, you don't know them all equally, but you know 200, acquainted with 200 people. Now let's just assume that all of those people are average. Okay, this is the key to the whole deal right here. If all of those people are average, then the statistics tell us that each one of them knows 200 people. Now you've got 200 people who each know 200 people. That's 40,000 people. 40,000 people. You are one person away from their 200, a referral away from 200 people. And you're a referral away, when you take it collectively, you're only one referral away from 40,000 people. So when I get a business card, when I collect a business card from somebody, and I take this business card, here's one of the biggest things to think about. This business card isn't worth one name. It's worth 200 names. This person is the bridge, the referral source, the contact for me to do business with everyone this person knows. 200 by 200. So every time I add a name, in a manner of speaking, I'm adding 200 names. I'm adding this person and everyone they know. That's a big deal. That is a big deal. When I started making a study of this database and how it works, because I was in the business for 15, 16 years without a database. Because when I started in 1977, nobody talked about a database really. And nobody talked about staying in touch with a database on a regular basis. But when I observe the most successful people, and I do that even to this day, I pay attention to the most successful people, and I ask the most successful people, how do you get your business? How do you get your leads? What do you do for lead generation? Where does most of your business come from? What's your number one source of business? For every 100 people I ask that question to, 99 and a half of them will tell me it comes from personal referral or my database. Now, I don't have to be all that smart when I hear that 99 and a half out of 100 people get their number one source of business is a strong database. When I hear that, I'm thinking, wow, for me to be successful, that's what I should do. I should have a database and I should stay in touch with it on a regular basis. One of my last years in production was 1994, right before I joined Keller Williams. I did do a little production when I started at Keller Williams, but I was also doing some other things with ownership and regions. But in 1994, maybe 93, somewhere in that time frame, when I wasn't with Keller Williams, I was a solo agent. I did have an administrative assistant. And my best year was about $12 million. It was about 60 units. And out of the 60 closed units, 59 of them came from my database. Now, that wasn't a killer year by today's standards for a single agent, but back then it was a pretty good year. And you also had to take into account that I was training. So I was on the road 100 days that year. I was on the road 100 days that year training. And I still did 60 closed units by myself. But that's not even, forget that part. Here's the key to the whole thing. 59 out of the 60 came from my database. That's the key. Now, I got all kinds of things I can tell you that it's statistically keeping existing business is 3 times cheaper than going out and getting new business. And that's true. But let me tell you one thing that's real true. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot easier. It's a lot better to do business with people that already know you, like you, and trust you than it is to try to win someone over with the trust game, starting off as pretty close to complete strangers. When you start off with a stranger, the loyalty factor is very low. When you start off with someone who already knows you, likes you, and trusts you, even if it's through a common friend, the loyalty factor goes way up. I was talking to a guy about getting in the business one day, and I kind of got wandering around on what I was telling him. And I told him, I said, it's a great business, but it's not always great. There's some bad days. I mean, there's some bad people. There's other agents that are wacky. There's buyers that are wacky. There's sellers that are wacky. I mean, that's just the truth. And I started telling him stories about my worst deals. And I told him, I said, out of my 5 worst deals, 4 of them came to me, and I used the term cold. And here's what I mean. One of them had walked into an open house. I didn't know them from Adam. They walked into an open house, and I started staying in touch with them, and then they wanted me to list their house. 2 of them called me on my sign in the yard, and one of them met me just like at a restaurant or somewhere, just kind of cold. There was no prior relationship. I barely knew these people. I didn't know anyone they knew. And 4 out of those 5 turned out really horribly. 3 of the 4 I fired as clients. I fired one buyer and 2 sellers. They couldn't believe it. Matter of fact, a couple of them said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Oh, yes, I can." I said, "I'm miserable, and I'm afraid I'm taking you with me. So life's too short." And I've never forgotten how unpleasant those deals were and how pleasant it was to work with people who would call me up, and maybe I wouldn't know them, but they'd call me up and they'd say, "Hey, Dick, my name is Robert, and Tom Allen told me to give you a call, and he said you're one of the best realtors he's ever met, and that you would take care of us. We want to buy a house in Dallas, and we are so excited about coming there and meeting you and having you help us." Okay, that is the intro I like, rather than, who are you? You're in it just for the money. I'm not signing a buyer rep agreement. I don't trust you. See, I don't do well with that. Now, maybe you guys like that kind of approach, and you take it on as a challenge, but I don't really think that's the case, is it? So anyway, so one of the key things for you to remember and to think about is this 200 by 200 concept. So let's do the math this way. I told you I started off with 300 in my database. So again, just think about the upside, the possibilities. That's 300 people times 200. So that's 60,000 people. 60,000 people, I'm only one referral away from. Now, when I got my database up to 1,800, now that's 1,800 times 200. That's, now I'm lost. 3.6 million or 360,000? 360,000. 360,000 people I'm one referral away from. And all I was doing was one postcard a month. One postcard a month. Now, let me tell you where I was brilliant, and let me tell you where I was completely idiotic. Okay, so here's where I was brilliant. And by the way, it wasn't brilliant. It was just an observation. When I moved from 300 to 400 to 500, what I noticed was the number of calls went up. And I thought right away, oh, okay, I get this. More people, more calls, more calls, more leads, more leads, more closings, more money. It was a numbers game. It was a numbers game that said I would get more calls and therefore more business and more money from 500 people than I would from 300 people. Now here's where I make the incredible jump, right? So if that were true, I'll bet I'd have even more calls if I made it up to 700 or 900 or 1,200. And so I became ultra focused on adding people to my database. Now, they were all people that I had met. I did not ever buy a lead or a name. Never. I never bought a lead or a name. I never cold called. I never knocked doors. Now, were those options? Yes. Were they good options? Yes. They just weren't right for me. So all of the people I met then went into my database, and my mindset was they're going in my database for life. And so when I got up to 1,800, I had tons of business. I was really busy because again, I only worked on my business 200 days that year. I was traveling 100 days to do my training. And so I was really very busy and very happy. It was all good. Okay, here's where I missed the boat. Okay, this just flew right past me and I never realized this. I never realized that if I touched all the people in my database, if I contacted them more frequently than once a month, 12 times a year, I never thought about if I touched them more frequently, I would get more calls. Now, by the way, I know it's true. It's a numbers game and it's statistically true. That's why in the Red Book, it recommends 33 touches. 33 touches. If I had touched these people 33 times, if I was touching 1,800 people 33 times, I couldn't have handled all the business. It wouldn't have even been close. But I could have gotten some willing volunteers to help me with that business and pay me referral fees. I just never thought about that. I never thought if I could just take 12 touches a year, 12 contacts a year, up to 18, that's a 50% increase in touches. That would have been astronomical to my business. And so here's what I know. And you guys think about this. Do you have to do 33 touches? No, you don't. But 33 touches will get you more business than 21 touches would, all other things being equal. Well, what about 18 touches? Well, 18 touches works, but not as well as 21. What about 12 touches? Well, 12 touches works, but not as well as 18. Well, what about 6 touches a year? Well, 6 touches works, but not as well as 12. What about 2 touches a year? 2 touches probably won't work at all because there's too much time between the touches. You see, when you're touching people 12 times, 18 times, 21 times, or 33 times a year, those touches become sort of cumulative. People will call you or touch base with you or see you and they'll say, I hear from you all the time. People said that to me frequently when I would run into them. Gosh, I hear from you all the time. And I wanted to say, I laughed, but I wanted to say, no, you don't. You only hear from me once a month. But once a month over a year, 2 years, 3 years makes them think it's all the time. But 2 touches a year, that doesn't even penetrate. Even if it's 2 times a year for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I just don't believe that's worth doing. I think you got to be at 6 or more. But I'll tell you this, if you're not doing this at all, having a database of a couple hundred people and touching it 6 times will change your life. And you'll like it so much, you'll want to take the 6 up to 9 or 12 or 15 or 18. So it is a numbers game. It's a numbers game, but it's not a blind numbers game. It's a quality numbers game in terms of the relationship levels. It's a strategic numbers game in terms of how you touch them and how often you touch them. And frankly, as a new agent, it was also a strategy for me to really think about the money I spent touching them, the contacts. Because some contacts don't cost anything and some contacts cost big money. I had a hard time. There was an agent office right next to me, big time agent, very big time agent, who later came to Keller Williams. I was at Remax before I was at Keller Williams, and she was at Remax also, and she officed right next to me. And she was probably one of the biggest producers in the city of Dallas, which is a big area. And her name is Mary Harker, the Harker 5-star team. When she joined Keller Williams, she was well known in Keller Williams circles as a mega agent. And she said one day to me, she said, Dick, you need to send your people a calendar. And I said, I do? And she said, yeah, they'll love the calendar. And here's the calendar you ought to send them. And she gave me the name of the calendar company. Well, the calendar was like $1.50 each. And the postage was like $1.60. That's like $3 a piece. So, I'm fairly new and I'm going, $3 each. I'm not sending out 1,800 calendars, $3 each. That's $5,400 for one touch. Now, admittedly, those who use the calendars, they had magnets and they put them on the refrigerator. They'd see that calendar a lot, but I just couldn't count on that. I just could not count on it. I wasn't financially ready to make that jump. So what I did was I picked out 50 people, my closest 50, my best 50, and I sent out 50 calendars. And it was a big hit. It was a big hit. Now understand that's $3 a pop, as I mentioned to you. Although the first year, my wife and I drove around and hand delivered about half of them to save the $1.75 or whatever the postage was. I scrapped for it. But I want you to understand the postcards cost less than 50 cents. Matter of fact, back then they were less than 40 cents. Less than 40 cents with postage, first class postage, plus the cost of creating the postcard, printing and everything, less than 40 cents a piece. So let's do the numbers, because that's one thing everybody wants to know when they hear about this. Well, what's it going to cost me to stay in touch with people? And the answer is, I've already explained this to you. Well, it depends. If you're going to call all your people, it won't cost you anything. If you're going to try to see all your people face to face, it won't cost you anything. If you're going to email all your people, it won't cost you anything. But if you're going to email people, even though it won't cost you anything, you're going to get very little bang for that $0. Because I believe that email is the least effective way to stay in touch with people. I call it, here's my phrase. You won't find this in the red book either. My phrase is, I think there's a hierarchy of touches. I think it goes from best to worst, from most effective to least effective. The most effective touch is a face-to-face touch, some sort of a face-to-face meeting. Now, the problem with it, it's the least efficient, because it takes a lot of time to go around and see 200 people or 300 people or 400 people. And frankly, you find out that your database isn't all local. And we're going to come back to that. Your database isn't all local if you're doing what you need to do. So you're not going to really be face to face with the people who aren't local. So one thing that's become very popular are client events. Now what I'm doing is I'm doing face to face, but I'm doing face to face with a group of them all at the same time. I'll gather 25 to 50 to 100 to 200 clients or people who referred people to me, and we'll do a picnic, or we'll rent a movie theater, or we'll go have a golf outing, or we'll go on a wine tasting trip, and I'll be with multiple of them at the same time. So that's one thing. But then you go down and you say, okay, what's the next most effective? I think phone call. I think a phone call is the next most effective. Then you go to number 3. I think number 3 is a personal handwritten note. A handwritten note is the next most. Now, these are just my opinions, so you can agree with them or not. Now, number 4 becomes snail mail. And my favorite kind of snail mail has always been postcards, because postcards can be cheaper than newsletters or cheaper than things. I was helping a young man in our office here in the Dallas area kind of get himself going, get his business going. And I said, so what are you doing right now? And he said, well, I'm mailing out a letter that I buy from Brian Buffini. He puts out a letter a month, and you can buy it. And so I buy it, I put it in an envelope, I address the envelope, and I send it to people. And I said, well, so what's the total cost to you per letter? He said, well, it's a little over $1. And I said, well, I don't understand completely. It's very generic. He goes, yeah. And I said, why don't you try to figure out a way, even if it's generic, to send something out to everybody and it be 40 or 50 cents. Now you can send twice as many times for the same cost. That's what postcards do for you. That is what postcards do for you. So I sent out postcards, and that's how I chose to do it. I found it very effective. It was a good blend. By the way, once you get the system going, you can basically leverage it out and have somebody else do 95% of it. So you don't really touch much of anything once you've created or bought the postcards, and then you furnish someone with the mailing list of your clients, of the people in your sphere of influence, in your database. You furnish a printer with that list of names. You decide on the postcard design, and then it just goes out once a month, or it goes out however frequently you want it to go. So there is a little bit of work on the front end, but then once you've gotten the work on the front end done, it's all kind of delegated. And I thought that was it worked very well for me. So again, for me, the target market was, let's on a month in and month out basis, let's try to keep our touches at no more than 50 cents a piece. And then if we decide to do something special, we'll decide to do it special to the whole group or to part of the group, whatever I want to spend for that. Now I want to talk to you about who should go in your database. Here's my thought. My thought is it should be everybody that you meet, no matter where you meet them and how you meet them, with two exceptions. There's 2 groups of people that won't go in your database under any circumstances. Number 1 is real estate agents, other real estate agents who work the same area you do. Other real estate agents who work the same area you do, because they're not going to do business with you, and they're not going to refer you business. They're going to do their own business. Now, there is a way to get the overflow of agents in your office, but that doesn't involve staying in touch with them in a database. That's a whole nother deal. We're talking about on an ongoing basis. Why would I put another realtor in my territory? Why would I put them in my database and stay in touch with them? I don't see that. Now, real estate agents from another area outside of my area, absolutely. And so in my database of 1,800, as an example, over half of them were real estate agents. And one of my strategies was I went to the annual convention called Family Reunion every year. And I had a goal of coming back with 100 names of people I met while I was at Family Reunion. And I put them in my database and I started staying in touch with them forever. 100 names. I've been, in my whole career, I've been to over 100 conventions. Over 100 conventions in my whole career. And I was always pretty focused on meeting new people and then staying in touch with them. But when I had 1,800, again, think about this, when I had 1,800 people in my database, approximately 1,000 of them were agents from all over the country. Anytime I met anybody, no matter where they lived, they had the potential to refer business to me. So my wife is from Texas. She's from up in the Panhandle, you know. Texas has actually, in a way, it has kind of two panhandles. One's north, one's west. The west panhandle is out by El Paso. The north panhandle is up by Amarillo, Texas, almost into Oklahoma. That's where she's from. And so once we got married, we would go up there and visit her parents periodically. Her brother and sister lived there. Actually, her sister had moved, but her brother still lived there. And I would meet some of her friends, and I would meet some of her brother's friends. And one of her brother's friends said to me one day, he said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Why do you send me those crazy postcards?" He said, "You know, I can never leave this town because I'm the insurance broker in this town. And the reason I'm the insurance broker in this town is my father was the insurance broker before me. And the reason he was the insurance broker in this town is his father was the insurance broker in this town. So my grandfather started this insurance company, gave it to his son, who gave it to me. I'm a third generation insurance broker here in town. I'll never leave this town. I can't." And I asked him this question. I said, "Peter, do you know anybody who lives in Dallas right now?" He goes, "Yeah, I know a few people who live in Dallas right now. I went to school with them. I went to college with them." I said, "If one of those guys called you or you saw him just accidentally," and he said, "Hey, I got a promotion. I'm going to move to New York and I'm going to be selling my house in Dallas." He said, "What would you tell them if they just said that to you?" He said, "Well, I'd tell them they should call you." And I said, "Well, that's why you're getting the postcards. And that's why you're going to keep getting the postcards. I don't want you to ever forget what you just said. I don't want you ever to forget that I'm there waiting to help, not you, because I get it. You're never moving. But I want to help everybody you know who's either moving out of Dallas or moving to Dallas." And he lives up in the Panhandle and he's never going to move. He told me that 30 years ago, and he's still there. But he's referred 3 people to me over that 30 years. And you go, "Well, that's not that big a deal." Oh, yeah, 3 people to me. That's about $20,000. In over 20 years, 50 cents a postcard times 12, $6 a year. That's $120 I have spent staying in touch with him over 20 years. 20 years. I've spent $120. And he referred 3 people to me, and I've made 22,000, call it 20,000. $20,000 for $120. Unbelievable. It's an unbelievable cost or investment compared to the reward or the profit. That's one of the great things about our business, isn't it? In our business, one sale is worth $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. Can you imagine? Some of you came from a business, like, I don't know why I pick on these people, and it's not picking on them, but I think about a baker. And I think a baker has to work like the Dickens. And if they work really hard, they're trying to figure out how to sell another dozen donuts or another cake or whatever. You sell another dozen donuts And your profit, after figuring out the cost of the donuts, you maybe make another $2 or $4. $4, $2, $6. You got to sell a lot of cakes and donuts to make big dollars. You know what? If we sell 20 houses and if our average price is $300,000, that's $9,000 a sale. That's $180,000. That we are lucky. We are lucky that we have such a high price per, or high gross commission income per transaction. So anyway, all right, so what have we talked about? Mets versus haven't Mets. Everybody you meet, except for, I haven't given you the second category. Everybody you meet goes into your database with two exceptions. One of them is real estate agents who work your own area. And number two, this is the last one. Otherwise, they go in, no questions asked. Number two is anybody you meet you don't want to do business with. Now, by the way, there are people out there you do not want to do business with. For some of us, it could be certain family members, you know. For others of us, it could be somebody who's bragging about suing people over this or over that. That's a red flag. That is a red flag. That's something I've learned, and you need to think about that. I'm not telling you to run away from them because that would be giving advice. I'm out of the advice giving business. I'm into the teaching you how to think. So there are people that you'll come across that you just, life's too short to work with them. And I've kind of done that with my brother and his wife. And I've told him that, by the way. I've told him that. I said, I just don't think we work well together. Because you expect way more from me than I'm capable of providing. And so I don't really work with them anymore, although every year my brother does lean on me to help him fight his assessed tax value. But anyway, that's another story. All right, and so we've talked about the non-negotiables. You have to have a database if you're going to be successful. That's just my opinion. And you have to stay in touch with it somehow if you're going to be successful for your career. I gave you the the negotiables, how you stay in touch with it, how often you stay in touch with it, and how you build your database. But at the end of the day, there's got to be a database, in my opinion. At the end of the day, you got to stay in touch with it to be successful. Remember page 142. Remember the cost of how you touch the people is a factor. The efficiency is a factor. The effectiveness is a factor. There's what I call the hierarchy of touches. The most important touch or effective touch is face-to-face, but it's not efficient. It is not efficient. It can't easily be delegated to be face-to-face. But there's ways to do things that make all of them. And by the way, in the Red Book, with the 33 touch, you'll see some samples of the mix that you could put together that would add up to 33 touches. It involves postcards, it involves social media, it involves sending them items of value. And so there's a mix, just listed, just sold. And so look at that in the Red Book, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, and see what those options are. And then create your own mix for 12 or for 15 or 18 or 21 or 33. If you're not doing this at all, I'm not sure I'd start with 33. If you're not doing this at all, I think I would walk before I ran. So if you're not doing this at all, I would encourage you to start with 12 touches in a year. And let that sink in and see how that's working. Make the mistakes you end up making and then correct them. You're going to see great results, and then you're going to be enthused, and you're going to get more committed and more focused. Then we talked about cost. One other thing that we talked about was that it does make a difference in how often you stay in touch with them, and that more touches means more business. But we did not rule out the idea that even as few as 6 touches a year can be successful. So that's another one that you build up into higher touches per year. We talked about the two groups are the only two groups that don't go in. One of the big fallacies is, well, they don't live in my area. And I gave you a story about that. And so if they don't live in your area, does that mean they don't go in? Well, that's not one of the two groups, is it? So one of the two groups is not where they live. So anybody, no matter where they live, has the capability of referring people to you who are either leaving your territory or coming into your territory. So it doesn't matter where they live. That is a big misnomer across the board, very big. So theoretically, all of you should put me in your database because I'm in Dallas, Texas. And if I ever run into somebody who wants an agent in New Jersey, then the person that I'm going to remember is the person who's touching me on a regular basis. That's just how simple this is. It's not magic. It's very simple. The last thing I want to talk to you about is I want to talk to you about how the conversion ratio for METs, and this is in the Red Book again, they say 12 to 2. So for every 12 names you have in your database, you'll get 2 pieces of business. They say for the barely METs or the haven't METs, the ratio of business is 50 to 1. Now that is an extreme difference between 12 to 2 and 50 to 1. So what they're saying in the Red Book is they're saying dealing with people who already know you, like you, and trust you will be a bigger payoff, a shorter time of payoff than trying to take someone who barely knows you at all and move them into a position of trust so that can happen. Cost we got. I don't have anything else. We're at 2 o'clock or 1 minute till. I would entertain any of you who want to unmute yourselves and ask me a question. I didn't check the chat box, so now's your time to unmute and ask me a question if you have one for me. Anybody? I'll look at the chat box.
Thank you. A question for you, Dick. With 1,800 people in your database, were you giving them phone calls, and if so, how often?
No, that's part of what flew right past me, Matthew. I just didn't even consider the possibility of more touches. Now, if I was still doing that today, then I would add telephone to it, but it wouldn't be to all 1,800. What I would do is pick out probably about 200, maybe 300, and call them more frequently than trying to call 1,800 people once a year. I would take 300 and call those 300 2 or 3 times a year. And quite frankly, Matthew, I would not feel comfortable with my relationship with all 1,800 to call them all. But the moment one of them who wasn't getting a call from me, but was getting my postcards, the moment they referred somebody to me, they would move into the 300. Because that's the goal, right? The goal is to move everybody up, everybody into the inner circle. And the moment somebody refers someone to me, they've moved way up into the inner circle. And now I'm going to treat them like an A or A+ type client, right?
Let me ask you a question. If, let's say you did have the 1,800, would you have an assistant contact the other, you're calling that maybe 200 that you're keeping in touch with, 300. Would you have an assistant make a contact phone call to the other?
I think that's a great idea. I think that would be a great idea. And here's what I would do. And I've heard this before, Matthew. I would make sure that my assistant used this script. Hey, my name is Mary Jo, and I work with Dick Dillingham, and Dick has asked me to call you. Okay, I think that's a very cool script to make sure they know this call is being originated by me, even if I'm not on the call. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I think that's fantastic. Now, my assistant's doing a lot of other stuff too. So maybe my assistant calls the next 300 of the 1,800, or maybe it's not my assistant, but I get someone part-time to come in, a virtual assistant, say, and I pay them by the hour, and I hire them for 20 hours a week to make 4 phone calls to each person. I mean, you can figure out the math on how this would work, with the idea being, but the idea is, and one of the great scripts to people you don't know as well would be, Yes, my name's Mary Jo. I work with Dick Dillingham here in Dallas, and Dick has asked me to call you to make sure you're getting his mailers.
Mhm.
And he also wanted to know if there was anything he could do to help you or anyone you know with real estate in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Another great script would be Dick's wanted me to call you and ask you, he's trying to build his database. I won't say it's already 1,800, but I'd say he's trying to build his database, and he wanted me to call you specifically because he wants to add more people like you in his database. So he wants to know, do you know anybody that he should know? That's a magical idea from the standpoint of now I'm getting referrals from my own people of people to add to the database. So let's say you say, well, yeah, I'm pretty good friends with Scott Russo. Dick he ought to really get to know Scott. And so now I call Scott, not my assistant. I call Scott, introduce myself, and say, hey, Matthew Haviland recommended that I give you a call. Matthew and I have known each other for a long time. He said, you're a pretty cool guy. He said, now the way I would do things, I'm very funny. I have a sense of humor. So I might say something like, he said, you're a cool guy, but he said, you're a lousy golfer. I don't know what that was all about, Scott. And the moment he laughs, you know what? Now, that is so much better than meeting someone for the very first time walking into an open house. You see what I'm saying? The level of the relationship has increased because of the commonality of knowing you. So who do you know that I should know is pretty cool script. Or another great script that you can use. So Matthew, hope the family's doing good. Hope your job is going great. You know, the Ford, you know what Ford stands for? Family, occupation, recreation, dreams. He said, Matthew, if you got time for one quick business question. I know you're busy, so am I, but I want to ask you one business question if that's okay. And you say, yes,
Sure.
right? I say, well, okay, so Matthew, what I'm doing, I just got a listing, and I think it's a great deal. It's 4,000 square feet. It's on an acre and a half. It's $295,000, which is way below what I think it's worth. So what I'm doing is I'm calling everybody I know, and I'm asking them this question: who do you know who would be interested in hearing more about this new listing I have? So that's what I'm asking you, Matthew. Who do you know who might be interested in hearing more about it? Now, that carries a lot of bang for the buck. First of all, it's a touch with you. Second of all, it shows a proactive approach to the listing I just took. And third, I'm actually asking you if you're interested, but I'm not putting you in the position where you will say no to me. The worst I can hear from you is, well, I can't think of anybody right now, Dick. See, I hate rejection, but I don't consider that rejection. Anyway, that's off the top. So yeah, I would just continue. There's 101 ways to leverage this whole program, but you got to get it started, and you got to kind of organize it and kind of make sure you stay systematic with it. But there's no reason. I mean, you just go down just check in the Pennsylvania region. You just check the top 20, the top 50, the top 100 producers or producing teams in your region. Ask them, what's their number one source of business? I guarantee 95% of them or more will tell you it comes from their database. Well, how much proof do we need? You know, all of us. I mean, listen, I mean, if there's 20, 25 people on this call, and later others will see it and others will, hear the recording of it, over half of them will not have an active database that they're staying in touch with. Sometimes it's frustrating, but I never give up because it's worth it. That's what's going to make a career for you. So there's a great quote. I heard this the other day. I'm going to give you two quotes and then I'm out of here. One quote was, and it's just three words, but it tells a very full story, right? It's a simple quote, but then it tells a lot. Here's the three words. Ignorance leads to, put an arrow, knowledge, arrow, application. I start in ignorance, I gain the knowledge, but no good until I do the third part, apply it. So it doesn't do any good if you believe it's important to have a database. It doesn't do any good until you what? Actually have one and actually stay in touch with it on a regular basis. Here's the last quote. This quote was so important to me. I want to share this last quote with you. It was from John Wooden, the basketball coach, men's basketball coach at UCLA. He won 14 national championships. Without a doubt, the most highly regarded men's basketball coach, college basketball coach in history. And here's this quote: "Don't let what you can't do stop you from what you can do." You need to figure out what your strengths are. You need to figure out what you like doing, and then you need to do the heck out of it. See, I told you, I didn't like calling on for sale boners. I didn't like calling on expireds. I did not like knocking doors or making cold calls on the phone. I didn't like the geographic farm. I didn't like sign calls and ad calls. But you know what I liked? I loved putting a database together. I loved networking with people, getting to know them and asking them who they know that I should know. I loved that. I loved it. And I was really, really good at it. Thank heavens, because I wasn't good at anything else. So anyway, that's the last pearl I have for you. So I hope you guys got some ideas. Remember, none of you got any advice. I'm out of the advice giving business. I learned that in a class too. So I hope I gave you some things to think about. If you want to follow up, it's dillingham@kw.com. Be glad to visit with you if you have any more questions. Christine, I think you got this ball rolling a month or so ago. So thank you for thinking of me. Tom, thank you. If you're still here, I don't know if you are, but he was on the first part of the call. So all of you that were on the call, thank you very much. Hope you have a great, great weekend. And I hope someday we cross paths.